Zara Chen pressed her face against the cold metal wall of the transport ship, watching the blue marble of Earth shrink away through the small porthole. At 17, she had seen more battlefields than most seasoned warriors, but she had never seen her home planet from this distance. The irony wasn't lost on her that now, when she was finally leaving the war behind, Earth looked more beautiful than ever. "First time seeing home from up here?" asked Captain Morrison, settling into the seat beside her. The older man's weathered face carried the same tired expression that all veteran soldiers wore, but his eyes held something Zara had rarely seen directed at her: genuine concern rather than tactical assessment. Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. 7 years of military conditioning had taught her to keep emotions locked away, but something about leaving everything behind was making her feel strangely vulnerable. She had requested this transfer to the outer colonies not because she wanted adventure, but because she desperately wanted to disappear. The war against the hegemony had ended 6 months ago. Humanity had won, thanks in large part to soldiers like Zara who had been recruited as children and molded into perfect weapons. The hegemony's mistake had been underestimating human adaptability and the fierce protection humans showed for their young. When alien forces had invaded and started targeting schools and families, humanity had responded with a ferocity that shocked the galaxy. Children like Zara, whose families had been killed in the first wave of attacks, had been given a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: trained to fight back or watch more innocents die. At 10 years old, Zara had been small enough to infiltrate enemy positions, smart enough to learn alien technology, and angry enough to pull the trigger without hesitation. She became legendary among human forces. The Ghost, they called her, because she could slip past any defense and strike without warning. By age 14, she had personally eliminated more high-value hegemony targets than entire battalions. By 16, alien forces had placed a bounty on her head so large that it had become a running joke among human troops. But the war was over now. The hegemony had surrendered after their final offensive failed spectacularly. The galaxy had learned that humans didn't just fight to win, they fought with an intensity that bordered on madness when their families were threatened. Other species had rules about warfare, concepts of honor and limitation. Humans had only one rule: protect their own no matter the cost. "You know," Captain Morrison continued, "most kids your age are worrying about graduation parties and college applications. You've got a full scholarship waiting at New Geneva University. Full ride any program you want. The government owes you that much." Zara finally turned away from the porthole. "I don't know how to be a normal teenager, Captain. I can field strip a plasma rifle in 30 seconds, speak 4 alien languages and plan tactical insertions in my sleep. But I've never been to a school dance or worried about homework. I don't even know what normal teenagers do." The captain smiled sadly. "That's exactly why you need to go find out. You gave up your childhood to save everyone else's. Now it's time to try and get some of it back." The transport ship shuddered slightly as it engaged its jump drive. They were heading to Kepler 442b, a colony world that had been established during the war but had remained largely untouched by the conflict. It was perfect for Zara's purposes, a place where nobody would know her face or her reputation, where she could try to blend in and figure out who she was when she wasn't killing aliens. Zara pulled out a small tablet and scrolled through the information about her new identity. The military had been thorough. Zara Chen was now just another 17-year-old girl whose family had died during the war and who was being relocated to the colonies for a fresh start. Her military records were classified so deeply that most people couldn't access them even if they tried. She had a fake educational history, fabricated social media accounts from before the war, and even some manufactured childhood photos. The psychologist had insisted that having a normal background story would help her transition better. They had also warned her that the adjustment would be difficult. Survivor's guilt, identity confusion, difficulty forming relationships, Dr. Reeves had explained during their final session. "You're not just dealing with PTSD, Zara. You're dealing with the fact that you never got to develop a civilian identity. Your entire adolescence was built around being a weapon. Now you need to learn how to be a person." The tablet chimed with a message from her new guardian, Sarah Martinez, who ran a group home for war orphans on Kepler 442b. The woman seemed nice enough from their video calls, though Zara could tell she had no idea who she was really getting. The official story was that Zara had spent the war years in a refugee camp and had received basic education there. Nothing about her military service, nothing about the dozens of lives she had taken. "You're going to be fine," Captain Morrison said, noticing her worried expression. "You're the most resilient person I've ever met. If anyone can figure out how to be a normal kid, it's you." Zara wasn't so sure. She had been trained to adapt to any environment, but civilian life might be her greatest challenge yet. How do you make friends when you've spent years trusting no one? How do you worry about tests and grades when you've faced life and death decisions? How do you care about typical teenage problems when you've seen entire worlds burn? The jump drive finished its cycle, and stars shifted outside the porthole. They were now in the Kepler system, just a few hours away from her new home. Zara closed her eyes and tried to imagine herself as a normal 17-year-old girl. Someone who giggled with friends, complained about homework, and whose biggest worry was what to wear to school. It seemed impossible, but she had learned that humans were capable of impossible things. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to be normal too. The alternative, spending the rest of her life as nothing but a weapon without a war, was too depressing to consider. As the transport ship began its final approach to Kepler 442b, Zara made herself a promise. She would try. She would do whatever it took to build a normal life, even if it meant pretending to be someone she had never been. After everything she had sacrificed for humanity, she deserved at least the chance to discover who she might have become if the war had never happened. The colony transport touched down on Kepler 442b with barely a whisper, the advanced dampeners making the landing smoother than anything Zara had experienced in military dropships. Through the viewport, she could see a world that looked almost impossibly peaceful. Rolling green hills stretched to the horizon, dotted with small towns connected by clean energy highways. No blast craters, no burned forests, no memorials to the fallen. Sarah Martinez was waiting at the spaceport, exactly as she had appeared in their video calls, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a sign with Zara's name, though she was the only passenger disembarking. "Zara, welcome to New Haven," Sarah called out, her smile genuine and warm. "How was your journey?" "Long," Zara replied, shouldering her single duffel bag. Everything she owned fit in that one bag, and most of it was civilian clothes the military had purchased for her new identity. She felt strange wearing jeans and a sweater instead of tactical gear. Sarah chatted easily as they walked to her hover car, pointing out landmarks and explaining the layout of the colonial city. The buildings were all new, constructed with the latest atmospheric processors and shield generators, but designed to look welcoming rather than defensive. Children played in parks without armed guards. People walked the streets without constantly scanning for threats. "New Haven has about 50,000 residents now," Sarah explained as they drove through tree-lined streets. "Most are families who came here during the war, looking for somewhere safe to raise their children. We have excellent schools, a small but good university campus, and enough amenities that you won't feel isolated." Zara nodded politely, but inside, she was marveling at how normal everything looked. During the war, she had spent time in cities, but they had all been fortified, militarized places where civilians lived under constant threat. This felt like something from the old movies about pre-war Earth, the kind of place she had thought existed only in fiction. The group home was a large, comfortable building surrounded by gardens and play areas. Sarah explained that she currently housed 12 young people, all war orphans between the ages of 14 and 18. Most were working toward graduation and college applications, learning to build lives in peacetime. "Everyone here has lost family," Sarah said gently as she parked. "You're not alone in that. But we've found that healing happens best when people support each other and focus on moving forward." Inside, Zara was introduced to her new housemates. There was Marcus, 18, whose parents had died in a hegemony bombing run on Mars. Lisa and Tom were twins, 16, who had escaped from Earth during the first invasion. Ahmed, 17, had lost his entire extended family when the aliens targeted refugee camps. All of them had stories of loss and survival, but what struck Zara was how normal they seemed now. They argued about whose turn it was to do dishes, complained about homework, and made plans for weekend activities. They had somehow managed to build teenage lives despite everything they had lost. "So where did you spend the war?" Lisa asked during dinner. Sarah said you were in a refugee camp? Zara had rehearsed this story dozens of times. Camp Harmony on the far side of Luna. We were pretty isolated, so we didn't see much action. Mostly just waited it out. It was a complete lie, but it explained why she might seem awkward about normal teenage activities while still accounting for her obvious intelligence and physical fitness. The military psychologist had been thorough in crafting her cover story. That must have been tough, Marcus said sympathetically. At least you missed the worst of the fighting. Some of the stories from Earth. He shuddered. Zara almost laughed at the irony. Marcus had no idea that he was talking to someone who had been in the thick of that fighting. Someone who had probably been responsible for ending some of the battles he had heard about. Instead, she just nodded and made appropriate sympathetic noises. After dinner, Sarah showed her to her room, a small but comfortable space with a real window overlooking the gardens. It had a desk for studying, a bookshelf, and decorations that were clearly meant to make a teenager feel at home. There were even posters of popular music stars that Zara didn't recognize. I know this is all very different, Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Take your time adjusting. There's no rush to jump into everything at once. That night, Zara lay awake staring at the ceiling. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet. She was used to sleeping in military barracks or field positions where danger could strike at any moment. Here, the biggest threat seemed to be forgetting to do her laundry. She thought about the other kids in the house. They had all experienced loss and trauma, but they seemed to have processed it in ways that allowed them to move forward. They could laugh, make plans, worry about normal things. How had they managed that when she couldn't even figure out how to relax? The answer, she realized, was that their trauma had been about things that happened to them. Hers was about things she had done. Every alien she had killed, every mission she had completed, every choice she had made to prioritize the war over everything else, those weren't things that had happened to her. Those were things she had chosen to do. The next morning brought her first real challenge, high school enrollment. Sarah drove her to New Haven Central High, a modern building that looked nothing like the educational facilities in military camps. Students streamed through the hallways, talking and laughing, carrying books instead of weapons, worrying about tests instead of survival. Principal Foster was a cheerful woman who seemed genuinely excited to welcome a new student. We'll start you in standard junior level classes, she explained, reviewing Zara's fabricated academic records. If you find the work too easy or too difficult, we can adjust. Many of our war refugee students need some time to find their academic footing. Zara was given a schedule, a locker combination, and a student buddy named Jake Morrison, no relation to Captain Morrison, but the name still made her smile. Jake was a typical 17-year-old boy who seemed far more interested in talking about the upcoming football season than asking difficult questions about her background. So you're from Luna? He asked as he showed her to her first class. That's so cool. I've never been off-world. What's low gravity like? Another rehearsed answer. You get used to it pretty quickly. Walking normally takes some adjustment when you get back to standard gravity. This was actually true. Though Zara's experience with low gravity came from military operations on asteroids and space stations, not from living in a refugee camp. Her first class was Earth history, which felt surreal. She was learning about the war she had fought in, but from the perspective of civilians and historians rather than military strategists. The teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, discussed the conflict in broad strokes, focusing on political developments and social impacts rather than tactical details. The war changed humanity in fundamental ways, Ms. Rodriguez explained to the class. We learned that we were not alone in the universe, and we learned that we were capable of incredible things when threatened. The Child Soldiers program, while controversial, produced some of the most effective fighters in human history. Several students shifted uncomfortably. Zara kept her expression neutral, though inside she wondered what they would think if they knew one of those child soldiers was sitting right there among them. Of course, the teacher continued, the psychological cost was enormous. Many of these young warriors are now struggling to adjust to peacetime. It raises difficult questions about what we're willing to sacrifice to survive. After class, Jake walked with her to her next period. Heavy stuff, he commented. I can't imagine what it would be like to have your childhood taken away like that. I mean, fighting in a war when you're 10 years old? That's just messed up. Zara nodded, wondering if he would still think it was messed up if he knew that those child soldiers had saved his life and the lives of everyone he cared about. The moral complexity wasn't lost on her. What they had done to children like her was terrible. but it had also been necessary for humanity's survival. As the day progressed, she began to understand the enormous gulf between her experience and that of her classmates. They worried about pop quizzes and social drama. She worried about whether anyone would notice that she instinctively positioned herself with her back to walls and clear sightlines to all exits. But maybe, she thought, that was exactly what she needed to learn to do again: worry about normal things. It would take time, but she was determined to try. 3 weeks into her new life, Zara was discovering that being a normal teenager was harder than infiltrating enemy strongholds. At least in combat situations, she had clear objectives and defined rules of engagement. High school social dynamics were a mystery that no amount of military training had prepared her for. She sat in the cafeteria during lunch, mechanically eating a sandwich while observing the complex social hierarchies around her. There were the athletes, clustered around tables near the windows, discussing weekend games with an intensity that reminded her of mission briefings. The academic achievers occupied the center tables, comparing test scores and debating college applications. Various other groups filled the space: artists, musicians, theater kids, gamers, each with their own unspoken rules and customs. Zara found herself studying them like she had once studied enemy positions, noting patterns of behavior, alliance structures, and potential vulnerabilities. The problem was that she didn't know how to become part of any group without revealing too much about herself. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up to find Emma Castellanos, a girl from her physics class. Emma was one of the few students who hadn't tried to bombard Zara with questions about her mysterious past. She was quiet, thoughtful, and had the kind of gentle intelligence that reminded Zara of the field medics she had worked with during the war. "Sure," Zara replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Emma sat down with her own lunch and pulled out a tablet. "I was going over the physics homework. That problem about orbital mechanics is giving me trouble. You seem to understand it pretty well in class." This was familiar territory for Zara. Orbital mechanics had been part of her military training. Understanding trajectories was crucial for space-based operations. "It's actually not that complicated once you break it down into components," she said, sliding over to look at Emma's work. As she explained the concepts, Zara felt more relaxed than she had since arriving on Kepler 442b. This felt natural, helping someone understand something technical. It was similar to training younger soldiers, though obviously without the life-or-death urgency. "Wow, you really get this stuff," Emma said admiringly. "Where did you learn to think about physics problems like that?" Zara's mind raced. Her approach to the problem had been distinctly military, breaking down complex systems into manageable tactical elements. "Just practice, I guess. I had a lot of time to read during the war." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had done extensive reading during downtime between missions, though most of it had been technical manuals rather than textbooks. "Would you maybe want to study together sometime?" Emma asked. "I'm pretty good with biology and chemistry, but physics and math give me headaches." "I'd like that," Zara replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Having a study partner might help her feel more connected to normal student life. Their conversation was interrupted when Jake Morrison appeared at their table, looking unusually serious. "Hey Zara, can I talk to you for a minute?" Emma gathered her things and moved to give them privacy. Jake sat down and leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I hope you don't think I'm being weird, but I've been wondering about something." Zara's heart rate increased slightly, though she kept her expression neutral. "What's that?" "You mentioned you were in a refugee camp on Luna during the war, right?" "Camp Harmony?" "That's right." Her voice remained steady despite the alarm bells going off in her head. "It's just, my uncle worked for Colonial Services during the war. He helped coordinate refugee placement. I asked him about Camp Harmony, and he said it was shut down after 18 months due to supply problems. The residents were all relocated to facilities on Mars." Zara's mind worked rapidly. Her cover story was falling apart, and she needed to decide how to handle it. She could stick to the lie and risk further investigation, or she could pivot to a different story. Either option carried risks. "You're right," she said finally. "We were moved to Mars after Luna. I don't like talking about the Mars camps. They were rougher." Jake's expression softened immediately. "Oh man, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to pry into bad memories. I was just curious about Luna." "It's okay," Zara replied. "The whole war period is kind of a blur for me. Sometimes I mix up the details. This seemed to satisfy Jake, but Zara knew she would need to be more careful. The military psychologist had warned her that maintaining a false identity required constant vigilance. One slip could unravel everything. That afternoon, Zara had her first real test of how much her new life differed from her old one. During gym class, Coach Henderson announced they would be doing fitness assessments. For most students, this was a dreaded routine of push-ups, sit-ups, and timed runs. For Zara, it was potentially a disaster. 7 years of military conditioning had left her in exceptional physical shape. She could outrun, outlift, and outfight most adult soldiers, let alone 17-year-old civilians. But excelling too much would raise questions she couldn't answer. She watched as her classmates struggled through basic exercises. Jake managed 20 push-ups before collapsing. Emma did about 15. Most of the girls in the class were clearly not athletic types, grunting and straining through movements that Zara could perform effortlessly for hours. When her turn came, Zara deliberately performed at what she hoped was an above-average but not suspicious level. 30 push-ups, 40 sit-ups, a mile run in just under 7 minutes. Good enough to seem fit without being extraordinary. Not bad, Chen, Coach Henderson noted, writing down her scores. You've got natural athletic ability. Ever consider joining a sports team? Maybe, Zara replied noncommittally. The truth was that she had no idea how team sports worked. Military training was about individual excellence and unit coordination, not the kind of structured competition that seemed to dominate high school athletics. After school, she walked home with Emma, who had become her closest approximation of a friend. They were discussing their upcoming biology test when Emma suddenly stopped walking. Zara, can I ask you something personal? Here it comes, Zara thought. Another inconsistency in her story had been noticed. Sure. Do you ever feel like you don't fit in here? Like everyone else knows some secret about being a teenager that you missed? The question was so unexpected that Zara actually laughed. Every single day. Really? Because you always seem so composed, like you have everything figured out. If only she knew, Zara thought. Trust me, I'm just as confused as everyone else. Maybe more. They resumed walking, and Emma seemed encouraged by this admission. I keep thinking there's supposed to be some moment where I suddenly feel grown up, you know? Like everyone else is playing this game and I never learned the rules. Maybe nobody really learns the rules, Zara suggested. Maybe everyone is just pretending they know what they're doing. It was meant to be comforting, but as soon as she said it, Zara realized how true it was for her own situation. She was pretending to know how to be a normal teenager, just like her classmates were probably pretending to have their lives figured out. That evening, during the group dinner at Sarah's house, the conversation turned to weekend plans. Most of the residents were planning typical teenage activities: movies, shopping, hanging out at the local arcade. They invited Zara to join them, and she found herself agreeing despite her uncertainty. Later, as she worked on homework in her room, Zara reflected on the day's events. Her cover story was holding, but just barely. She was starting to form connections with people like Emma, but those connections were built on lies, and she was beginning to realize that her biggest challenge wasn't learning to act like a normal teenager. It was learning to feel like one. The girl who had spent 7 years as humanity's most effective weapon was discovering that the hardest enemy to defeat was her own past. But for the first time since arriving on Kepler 442b, she felt like victory might be possible. It would just take a different kind of strategy than any she had learned in the military. As she drifted off to sleep, Zara found herself looking forward to the weekend. Not because she knew what to expect, but because she was finally curious enough about normal life to want to find out. The weekend trip to the New Haven Recreation Center was Zara's first real attempt at normal teenage socializing, and it was proving to be more complicated than she had anticipated. The group from Sarah's house had been joined by several classmates, including Emma and Jake, creating a crowd of about 15 young people engaged in various activities. Zara found herself at the laser tag arena, watching Jake explain the rules with military precision that would have been amusing if it weren't so painfully inadequate. Okay, so you hide behind these barriers and try to shoot the other team's sensors, he said, gesturing at the foam obstacles scattered around the arena. Last team with players still active wins. The irony was overwhelming. Zara had participated in real combat situations that were essentially advanced versions of laser tag, except with actual consequences. She knew instinctively how to use the terrain, how to move without being detected, and how to coordinate with teammates for maximum effectiveness. The question was how much of that knowledge she could use without revealing her background. "Sounds fun," she said neutrally, accepting the plastic vest and toy gun. The equipment felt ridiculously lightweight compared to real tactical gear. The game began, and Zara immediately saw that her teammates were approaching it like a game rather than a tactical exercise. They were clustered together, chatting and giggling, making noise that would have gotten them killed in any real combat situation. The opposing team wasn't much better, rushing around without any coordination or strategy. For the first few minutes, Zara hung back and observed, trying to understand the social dynamics. This wasn't actually about winning. It was about having fun together, trash-talking the opposition and creating shared memories. The tactical objective was secondary to the social objective. She was so focused on analyzing the social elements that she almost missed Jake getting pinned down by 3 opponents. He was trapped behind a low barrier, unable to move without exposing himself to enemy fire. In a real combat situation, his position would be hopeless. Without thinking, Zara moved. She used a flanking route that took her through the arena's blind spots, approached the enemy position from an angle they weren't watching, and systematically eliminated all 3 opponents with quick, precise shots. The entire maneuver took less than 30 seconds. The arena fell silent except for the electronic sounds indicating successful hits. "Holy crap, Zara!" Jake called out, emerging from his hiding spot. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Too late. Zara realized that her instinctive response had been far too professional. Normal teenagers didn't execute tactical flanking maneuvers or demonstrate that level of situational awareness. I don't know," she said, trying to sound casual. "I guess I just got lucky." "That wasn't luck," Emma said admiringly. "That was like something from an action movie." The game continued, but Zara forced herself to play more like her teammates, less effectively, more focused on the social aspects. She made sure to get eliminated before the end, laughing and pretending to be frustrated when she was shot. But the damage was done. She had revealed too much and people were starting to notice patterns. After laser tag, the group moved to the arcade section, where Zara faced new challenges. Video games, it turned out, were another minefield. Many of the games were combat simulators or strategy games that drew on skills she possessed but couldn't demonstrate. She watched Marcus play a space combat simulator, struggling with controls that seemed intuitive to her. The game was modeling orbital mechanics and 3-dimensional movement in zero gravity, concepts that Zara understood from actual experience in space-based operations. "This is impossible," Marcus muttered, crashing his virtual spacecraft into an asteroid. "How are you supposed to fight in 3 dimensions?" "Think of it like swimming," Zara suggested before she could stop herself. "In space, there's no up or down, so you have to orient yourself using landmarks and vector calculations." Marcus tried her advice and immediately improved his performance. "Wow, that actually helps. How did you figure that out?" "Just thinking about physics," Zara replied weakly. Emma was watching her with increasing curiosity. "You're really good at seeing the strategic side of things," she observed. "It's like you think 3 steps ahead of everyone else." This was becoming a pattern. Every time Zara tried to participate normally, her training showed through. She was too good at tactical thinking, too comfortable with simulated combat, too knowledgeable about technical subjects that normal teenagers wouldn't understand. The group took a break for food, and Zara found herself sitting with Emma at a table overlooking the recreation center's main floor. Below them, families with young children were playing games and enjoying normal weekend activities, the kind of experiences Zara had never had. "Can I tell you something weird?" Emma said, picking at her French fries. "Sure. Sometimes when I look at you, I get the feeling that you're older than you look, not physically, but mentally. Like you've seen things that the rest of us haven't." Zara's heart sank. Emma was too perceptive, too good at reading people. It was exactly the kind of observation that could unravel everything. "What do you mean?" Zara asked carefully. "It's hard to explain. Like today with the laser tag thing. You moved like you actually knew what you were doing. not like someone playing a game. And in class, when we talk about the war, you get this look in your eyes, like you're remembering something instead of just learning about it. This was the moment Zara had been dreading. Someone had noticed enough inconsistencies to start putting pieces together. She had to make a choice: deflect and risk losing Emma's friendship, or reveal enough truth to satisfy her curiosity without exposing everything. The war affected everyone differently, Zara said slowly, even those of us who weren't directly involved. Sometimes I think about what it would have been like to live through that time, and maybe I get too caught up in imagining it. It was a half-truth, but Emma seemed to accept it. I do the same thing sometimes. My older brother was in the Colonial Guard, and he told me stories before he didn't come back. Maybe that's what I'm seeing in you, the weight of stories that feel too real. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching families below. Zara felt a pang of something she couldn't quite identify. Sadness, envy. These people had normal lives, normal problems, normal relationships. They had never been forced to make life or death decisions or carry the weight of necessary violence. "Emma," she said suddenly, "what do you want to do with your life, like long-term goals?" Emma smiled. "I want to be a doctor, help people heal instead of just surviving. What about you?" Zara had never really considered the question. Her entire identity had been built around being a weapon, a tool for winning the war. Now that the war was over, she wasn't sure who she was supposed to become. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never really thought about it." "Really? Most people our age have at least some idea. Most people our age haven't had their lives completely disrupted by the war," Zara pointed out. "Some of us are still figuring out who we are now that everything has changed." This seemed to resonate with Emma, who nodded thoughtfully. "I guess that makes sense. Maybe that's why you seem older. You're having to rebuild your identity from scratch." If only she knew how accurate that observation was. The rest of the afternoon passed more smoothly, with Zara being more careful to hide her unusual skills and knowledge. But the conversation with Emma had highlighted a fundamental problem with her situation. The closer she got to people, the harder it became to maintain her false identity. Real friendship required honesty, but honesty could destroy everything she was trying to build. On the way home, Jake fell into step beside her. "Hey, I wanted to say thanks for helping me out during laser tag. That was some serious tactical thinking." "Just beginner's luck," Zara replied automatically. "Maybe, but you should consider joining the school's strategy club. We compete in war games and tactical simulations. I bet you'd be really good at it." The suggestion sent a chill through Zara. The last thing she needed was to get involved in activities that would showcase her military knowledge. But Jake's invitation also represented something she had been looking for, a way to fit into the social structure of the school. "I'll think about it," she said non-committally. That evening, as she prepared for another week of pretending to be normal, Zara realized that her greatest challenge wasn't learning to act like a civilian. It was learning to want the things that civilians wanted, to care about the things they cared about, and to find meaning in a life that wasn't built around conflict. She was discovering that peace was harder than war, at least for someone who had never known anything else. The crisis came during what should have been a routine school day. Zara was in her third period chemistry class, half listening to Mrs. Patterson explain molecular bonds, when the emergency alert system activated throughout New Haven. The sharp, piercing tone made everyone in the classroom look up from their textbooks. Mrs. Patterson moved to her desk terminal, her face growing pale as she read the incoming message. "Students, I need everyone to remain calm," she announced, though her voice carried obvious tension. "We're implementing lockdown procedures immediately. Please move away from the windows and gather in the center of the room." For most of the students, this was a frightening but abstract situation, something they had practiced in drills but never experienced for real. For Zara, the sound of the alert system triggered instant combat readiness. Her heart rate elevated, her senses sharpened, and she began automatically assessing the classroom for defensive positions and escape routes. "What's happening?" Emma whispered, moving closer to Zara as students clustered together. "I don't know yet," Zara replied, though part of her mind was already analyzing possibilities. The alert system was specifically designed to warn of external threats, hostile vessels, armed intrusions, or other dangers that civilian populations couldn't handle on their own. Mrs. Patterson's terminal chimed with another message, and her face went from pale to white. "Students, I need you to listen very carefully. There has been an incident at the spaceport. We're told that a group of hegemony survivors has taken hostages and is demanding transport off-world." Several students gasped. Jake looked confused. "I thought the hegemony surrendered. I thought the war was over." "Most of them did surrender," Mrs. Patterson explained, her voice shaking slightly. "But apparently some remnants have been hiding on various worlds and they've become desperate. Colonial security is handling the situation, but we need to stay safe until it's resolved." Zara felt a familiar cold certainty settle over her. She knew exactly what this was. Desperate enemy combatants with nothing left to lose, probably poorly equipped but highly motivated. The kind of situation she had dealt with dozens of times during the war. The rational part of her mind insisted that this wasn't her problem anymore. Colonial security was trained for this kind of incident. She was supposed to be a normal teenager now, not a weapon to be deployed against threats. But another part of her, the part that had been forged in 7 years of combat, was already calculating distances, analyzing the school's layout, and considering response options. "Are they armed?" Emma asked quietly. Mrs. Patterson checked her terminal again. "The message doesn't specify, but we have to assume they are. That's why we're staying put until security forces can neutralize the threat." Marcus, who had been remarkably calm given his usual anxiety, suddenly spoke up. "What if colonial security can't handle it? What if these aliens are as good as the ones from the war stories?" Several students began to look genuinely frightened. The war might be over, but everyone had heard stories about hegemony tactical superiority and their willingness to kill civilians without hesitation. "Colonial security is well trained," Mrs. Patterson said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "We just need to trust them to do their job." Zara found herself studying the faces of her classmates, people she had come to care about over the past few weeks. Emma, who wanted to be a doctor and help people heal. Jake, who worried about football games and college applications. Marcus, who was just starting to overcome the trauma from his parents' death. They were all looking to the adults for protection, trusting that someone else would keep them safe. It was the kind of innocent faith that Zara had lost when she was 10 years old. Her internal debate was interrupted when the school's communication system crackled to life with an official announcement. "Attention all residents of New Haven. Colonial security forces are currently engaged with hostile elements at the spaceport. Several civilian hostages have been taken. We advise all citizens to shelter in place until further notice." The announcement continued with technical details about the situation, but Zara stopped listening when she heard the numbers. 6 hostiles, unknown weapons capability, at least 12 civilian hostages including children. The spaceport was only 2 kilometers from the school. If the situation escalated, if colonial security couldn't resolve it quickly, those hostiles might decide to expand their operation. Schools made tempting targets, lots of potential hostages, emotional leverage over the local population, and usually minimal security. "Mrs. Patterson," Jake called out, "shouldn't we be evacuating or something?" "The safest thing is to stay put," the teacher replied. "Moving around during a security incident could put us at greater risk." Zara bit her tongue to keep from correcting her. In this type of situation, staying stationary made you a predictable target. A mobile response was almost always preferable to passive defense, especially when dealing with desperate enemies who had nothing to lose. But she wasn't supposed to know that. She was supposed to be just another scared teenager. The next hour passed slowly with periodic updates from the authorities. The situation at the spaceport was ongoing. Colonial security was working to resolve the matter peacefully. Citizens should continue to shelter in place for their own safety. All of it was bureaucratic, language designed to avoid panic. But Zara could read between the lines. The negotiations weren't going well. The hostiles were probably escalating their demands. And colonial security was either unprepared for this type of situation or was being cautious to avoid civilian casualties. Both scenarios were bad news for the hostages. Another update came through. One hostile has been neutralized, Remaining elements have threatened to begin executing hostages if their demands are not met within the next 2 hours. Several students began crying. Emma grabbed Zara's hand, seeking comfort from someone who seemed composed. "This is really happening, isn't it?" she whispered. "Yes," Zara replied simply. "Are we going to be okay?" Zara looked around the classroom at her classmates, people she had been learning to care about, people who represented the normal life she was trying to build. Then she thought about the hostages at the spaceport, including children who were probably terrified and helpless. For 7 years, she had been humanity's weapon against exactly this kind of threat. She had the training, the experience, and the skills to end this situation quickly and decisively. The question was whether she was willing to give up her new identity to do what she knew needed to be done. "Mrs. Patterson," she said suddenly, standing up, "I need to use the bathroom." "Zara, no one is supposed to leave the classroom right now." "It's an emergency," Zara insisted, moving toward the door. Emma looked up at her with concern. "Are you okay? You look strange." Zara paused, looking down at her friend. In Emma's face, she could see the trust and caring that she had been working so hard to earn. But she could also see the fear. Fear that colonial security might not be able to protect them. Fear that the war they thought was over might be starting again. "I'm fine," Zara said gently. "I just need a minute." As she left the classroom, she could hear Mrs. Patterson calling after her, but she didn't stop. She had made her decision. The girl who wanted to be normal was going to have to wait. Right now, New Haven needed the weapon that humanity had created to protect people exactly like her classmates. The ghost was going back to work. Zara moved through the school's corridors with practiced silence, avoiding the main hallways where teachers might try to stop her. Her civilian clothes felt wrong now that she was back in operational mode, but they would have to do. She needed to get to her locker first. There were a few items there that most people wouldn't recognize as tactical equipment. The maintenance knife she kept for school projects was actually a military-grade blade. The emergency medical kit contained field treatment supplies that went far beyond basic first aid. And hidden in a false bottom of her textbook bag was something that should have been impossible for a civilian to obtain: a military-grade communication device that could tap into colonial security frequencies. As she retrieved her gear, Zara's mind was already shifting into the tactical mindset that had kept her alive through 7 years of war. The spaceport was 2 kilometers away across mostly open terrain. The hostiles would have chosen their position to control access points and sight lines. Colonial security would be approaching the problem like law enforcement, trying to negotiate, minimize casualties, follow protocols designed for dealing with criminals rather than enemy combatants. But these weren't criminals. They were soldiers who had lost everything and were fighting with the desperation of the doomed. You didn't negotiate with that kind of enemy. You eliminated them before they could harm innocents. She slipped out of the school through a service entrance, using skills that felt like muscle memory despite weeks of trying to suppress them. Once outside, she activated her communication device and began monitoring colonial security transmissions. Hostiles have moved to the main terminal building. They've got clear fields of fire on all approach routes. Sniper teams are in position, but we can't get a clean shot without risking the hostages. Negotiator reports they're becoming more agitated. They've started a countdown. 23 minutes until they begin executing civilians. Zara frowned as she listened. Colonial security was thinking like peacekeepers, not warriors. They were trying to save everyone, which was admirable but impractical. In this situation, the best way to save the most lives was to accept that some risks were necessary. She began moving toward the spaceport, using a route that would take her around the security perimeter. As she moved, she continued monitoring communications, building a mental picture of the tactical situation. 5 remaining hostiles, armed with military-grade weapons they had probably stolen from a colonial security depot. They were holding 12 civilians in the main terminal, using them as human shields while they demanded transport to neutral space. Colonial security had the building surrounded, but was reluctant to assault due to the hostage situation. It was a classic standoff scenario, and colonial security was handling it by the book. Unfortunately, the book was written for dealing with rational criminals who valued their own lives. Desperate enemy soldiers played by different rules. Zara reached the edge of the spaceport complex and began her reconnaissance. The terminal building was a typical colonial structure, mostly glass and steel, designed to be welcoming rather than defensive. The hostiles had chosen their position well. They could see any approaching threats while using the hostages to prevent sniper attacks. But the building's civilian design also meant it had vulnerabilities that military installations wouldn't have. Service tunnels for maintenance access. Ventilation systems large enough for someone small to navigate. Emergency exits that could be opened from the inside. She circled the complex, noting the positions of colonial security teams and identifying gaps in their coverage. They were competent but cautious, maintaining safe distances and focusing on containment rather than resolution. Her communication device crackled with another update. Countdown at 15 minutes. Negotiator requests permission to offer the transport they're demanding. Negative, came the response. We cannot allow armed hostiles to escape with civilian hostages. Then what are our alternatives? An assault will almost certainly result in civilian casualties. There was a long pause before the commanding officer responded. Continue negotiations. Buy us more time to find another option. Zara shook her head. Time wasn't going to solve this problem. The hostiles were desperate enough to take civilians in the first place. They weren't going to suddenly become reasonable. And every minute that passed gave them more opportunities to prepare for an eventual assault. She found what she was looking for on the north side of the building. A maintenance access that led to the service tunnels beneath the terminal. The entrance was outside Colonial Security's perimeter, hidden behind a landscaping feature that provided cover from the building's windows. As she prepared to enter the tunnels, Zara felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was what she had been trained for, what she was good at. The moral complexity of her situation, a 17-year-old girl preparing to kill people to save strangers, didn't matter right now. What mattered was that innocent people were in danger, and she had the skills to help them. The service tunnels were exactly what she had expected, narrow passages that ran beneath the terminal, providing access to electrical systems and life support infrastructure. She moved through them silently, navigating by memory of the building's layout and the muffled sounds coming from above. She could hear voices, the hostiles talking among themselves in the hegemony language that she had learned during the war. They were arguing about their options, becoming increasingly agitated as their deadline approached. One of them wanted to start killing hostages immediately to prove they were serious. Another was insisting they should demand different transport arrangements. The conversation told her everything she needed to know about their mental state. They were scared, angry, and running out of hope. That made them extremely dangerous to the hostages, but also potentially careless about security. Zara found an access point that would put her in the terminal's lower level, just below the main concourse where the hostiles were holding their prisoners. She could see through ceiling grates that the situation was exactly as bad as she had imagined. The 12 hostages were civilians of various ages, including at least 3 children. They were zip-tied and seated on the floor in the center of the main concourse, surrounded by the 5 remaining hostiles. The aliens were positioned to cover all the approaches, but they were focused on external threats. They weren't expecting someone to come up through the floor. One of the children, a girl who couldn't be more than 8 years old, was crying quietly. Her mother was trying to comfort her despite her own obvious terror. Several of the adult hostages looked like spaceport workers who had probably been caught completely off guard when the situation developed. Zara studied the tactical situation. 5 targets, spread out but all within the same large space. They were using military weapons but hadn't taken professional defensive positions. They were relying on the hostages as protection rather than proper cover in fields of fire. She could take them, but it would have to be fast and precise. Any delay would give them time to start shooting civilians. Her communication device buzzed with another update. 5 minutes until their deadline. All teams prepare for possible assault on my command. Zara switched off the device. She wasn't waiting for Colonial Security to make up their minds. This needed to end now, before those children got hurt. She positioned herself beneath the access point that would give her the best angle on the largest, Group of hostiles then took a deep breath and prepared to do what she had been trained to do. In a few seconds, the normal teenager named Zara Chen was going to disappear, and the ghost was going to finish what the war had started. The hardest part wouldn't be eliminating the threats. It would be figuring out how to explain to Emma and the others why their quiet classmate had just single-handedly ended a hostage crisis that had stumped colonial security. The operation took 37 seconds from start to finish. Zara emerged from the floor access with fluid precision, her movements silent and economical. The first hostile never saw her coming. A thrown blade found its target before he could register the threat. The second and third were eliminated in rapid succession as she moved through the terminal like smoke, using angles and blind spots that colonial security couldn't have accessed from their exterior positions. The fourth hostile managed to raise his weapon before Zara closed the distance. But 7 years of combat experience meant she was already moving when he began to react. The fifth and final target was reaching for a civilian hostage when Zara's last blade found him. The entire encounter was over before the hostages fully understood what was happening. "Everyone stay down and stay calm," Zara called out in a clear, authoritative voice that carried none of the uncertainty she showed in chemistry class. "You're safe now. Colonial security will be here in moments." She moved quickly to cut the zip ties binding the hostages, checking each person for injuries with practiced efficiency. The 8-year-old girl who had been crying looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are you a soldier?" the child whispered. Zara paused, meeting the girl's gaze. "I'm someone who wanted to help," she replied softly. The terminal erupted with activity as colonial security forces stormed the building, finally able to advance now that the threat had been eliminated. The tactical team leader, a stern-faced woman with captain's insignia, approached Zara with her weapon raised. "Hands visible. Identify yourself." "Zara Chen, civilian," she replied, raising her hands as requested. "I was nearby when I heard the situation developing." "You were nearby?" The captain's voice carried obvious skepticism. "A civilian just happened to single-handedly neutralize 5 hostile combatants?" Before Zara could respond, her communication device crackled with an incoming transmission. The voice that came through was one she recognized. "Colonel Martinez from Colonial Military Command. Captain Rodriguez, this is Colonel Martinez. Stand down your weapons. The individual you're detaining is under military protection." The captain looked confused but complied, lowering her sidearm. "Colonel, I need clarification on this situation." "Classified," came the immediate response. "Transfer the individual to my custody immediately. I'm en route to your location." 20 minutes later, Zara found herself in a secure room at Colonial Security Headquarters facing Colonel Martinez across a metal table. The older woman studied her with the kind of professional assessment that only came from years in military intelligence. "So," the colonel said finally, "the ghost decides to come out of retirement." Zara said nothing, waiting to see how this conversation would develop. "Did you really think we wouldn't be monitoring the situation? The moment Colonial Security reported their tactical problems, we knew there was only one civilian in the area capable of resolving it the way it was resolved." "I wasn't trying to blow my cover," Zara replied, "but those people needed help. And now your cover is completely destroyed. Colonial Security has footage of you eliminating trained combatants with the kind of efficiency that civilian self-defense classes don't teach. Your classmates are going to have questions. Your guardian is going to have questions. The media is going to have questions." Colonel Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed Zara a newsfeed. The headline read, "Mysterious Hero Saves Hostages at New Haven Spaceport." Below it was grainy, security footage showing a figure moving through the terminal with lethal precision. "The good news," the colonel continued, "is that the footage isn't clear enough to make a positive identification. The bad news is that everyone who knows you is going to recognize your unique skill set." Zara slumped in her chair. Weeks of careful identity construction, destroyed in less than a minute of being who she really was. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on what you want to happen," Colonel Martinez replied. "We can extract you, give you a new identity on a different world, let you try the normal life experiment again somewhere else. Or you can go home and figure out how to be both things, the person you were and the person you're trying to become." The idea terrified Zara more than any combat mission she had ever undertaken. How do I explain this to people who care about me? How do I tell Emma that her study partner is actually a child soldier who killed more people than most adult warriors? Maybe you start by telling them that you're someone who gave up her childhood to protect theirs, Colonel Martinez suggested. Someone who's trying to learn how to be a normal person, precisely because she values what normal people have. They sat in silence for several minutes before the colonel spoke again. The hostage situation today, that wasn't an isolated incident. There are hegemony remnants scattered throughout colonial space, some of them desperate enough to target civilians. Colonial security isn't equipped to handle that kind of threat. They're peacekeepers, not counterterrorism specialists. Zara looked up sharply. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice. You can run away from who you are, or you can find a way to integrate both sides of yourself. Maybe there's a middle path where Zara Chen, the teenager, and the ghost can coexist. What would that look like? Finish high school. Go to college if you want. Build the normal life you're looking for. But also be available when situations like today arise. Situations where your particular skills can save lives that would otherwise be lost. It wasn't the simple answer Zara had been hoping for, but it was honest. She couldn't erase 7 years of being a weapon any more than she could instantly become a normal teenager. Maybe the real challenge was learning to be both. I need to go back to school, she said finally. I need to face the questions. Colonel Martinez nodded approvingly. That's the hardest mission you've ever accepted. An hour later, Zara walked back into New Haven Central High School. The corridors buzzed with excited chatter about the hostage crisis and the mysterious hero who had resolved it. Students clustered around tablets and wall screens, watching news coverage and speculating about the identity of the person in the security footage. She found Emma in the library, looking worried and relieved when she spotted Zara. Thank God you're okay, Emma said, rushing over. When you disappeared during the lockdown, I was terrified something had happened to you. I'm sorry I worried you, Zara replied. I needed to process what was happening. Emma studied her friend's face carefully. Zara, can I ask you something? Of course. That footage from the spaceport, the person who saved those hostages, the way they moved, the way they handled the situation. It reminded me of how you moved during laser tag last weekend. Here it was, the moment of truth. Zara could lie, deflect, maintain her false identity. Or she could trust that the friendship she had been building was strong enough to handle the truth. Emma, she said slowly, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. But I need you to know that everything I've told you about caring about our friendship, about wanting to learn how to be normal, that's all true. Emma's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded for Zara to continue. My name is Zara Chen. I'm 17 years old. I've never been to a school dance or worried about prom. I don't know how to drive a car or paint my nails or any of the 1,000 little things that normal teenagers learn. She took a deep breath. But I do know how to speak 4 alien languages, how to move silently through any terrain, and how to eliminate threats to protect innocent people. Because when I was 10 years old, my family was killed by the hegemony, and I spent the next 7 years learning to be humanity's weapon against exactly the kind of monsters who took hostages today. Emma stared at her for a long moment, processing this revelation. Finally, she spoke. So when you helped me with physics homework, you weren't just good at academics. You were applying knowledge you learned for military purposes. Yes. And when you said you wanted to learn how to be a normal teenager, you meant it literally. You've never had a normal life. Not until I came here. Emma was quiet for another moment, then surprised Zara by smiling slightly. Well, she said, that explains why you always seem like you're analyzing everything. You're not just shy. You're actually learning how to be a civilian. You're not. Scared of me? Zara, you saved 12 people today, including children. You've spent your entire adolescence fighting to protect people like us. Why would I be scared of someone who gave up everything to keep others safe? For the first time since arriving on Kepler 442b, Zara felt like she might actually be able to build the life she wanted. It wouldn't be the simple, uncomplicated existence she had originally hoped for, But maybe it could be something better. A life where she could be both the weapon humanity needed and the person she wanted to become. So, Emma said, settling back into her chair, want to help me with biology homework? And maybe afterward you can tell me what it's really like to be a hero. Zara smiled, a genuine expression of happiness rather than a practiced attempt at normalcy. I'd like that, she said. But first, let me tell you about why being a hero isn't nearly as important as learning to be a friend.